Hey everyone, welcome back to GME Compass. I'm Julie Galano, and today we're diving into a topic that can make or break the health of a residency or a fellowship program: how to structure an effective PEC agenda and prepare for PEC meetings effectively. We recently polled our community to see what everyone wanted to receive professional development on next, and the PEC and CCC overwhelmingly was what everyone had asked for. So we're going to kick off our series now, focusing on PEC first. So if you've ever walked into a PEC meeting feeling completely overwhelmed, unsure where to start, buried in spreadsheets, or wondering how the conversation somehow turned into discussing parking issues for 45 minutes, you're not alone. PEC meetings are one of the most important infrastructure meetings within graduate medical education. However, many programs struggle with making them productive, strategic, and sustainable. So in today's video, we're going to walk through what the PEC actually does, how to structure an agenda and create meaningful discussion, how to prepare before the meetings without last-minute chaos, how to use that data effectively, and how to turn PEC meetings into tools for improvement instead of just compliance exercises. So whether you're a new program coordinator, experienced manager, program director, or institutional leader, hopefully this conversation gives you practical ideas that you can immediately apply within your own program. So before we jump in, a quick disclosure. We have no financial disclosures related to this video. Everything that we discuss today comes from our own experiences working across graduate medical education continuum in different institutional structures and environments. This presentation reflects our personal experiences and perspectives. It is not representative of any of the organizations or the roles that we may currently be holding or held. One of the things we really do try to focus on with GME Compass is practical operational insight. The things that people often learn through experience, but they aren't always formally taught. So with that, our learning objectives for our discussion today is going to be for you to understand the purpose and the function of the PEC, learn how to structure an effective and organized PEC agenda, identify strategies to improve meeting preparation and efficiency, understand how to use data more meaningfully during discussions, and develop systems that create accountability and continuous improvement. Because at the end of the day, PEC meetings shouldn't just feel like another accreditation requirement. They should actually help programs improve. So why PEC meetings matter? I think one of the biggest mindset shifts that help PEC meetings improve is realizing that they're not just accreditation checkboxes. These are operational strategy meetings. A strong PEC structure helps to improve your program oversight, quality improvement, communication, resident engagement and well-being, faculty accountability, and faculty engagement and well-being, as well as institutional readiness. When PEC meetings are done well, they help programs identify issues earlier, create meaningful action plans, and avoid reactive crisis management. Preparation reduces the stress for everyone involved at the end of the day. Programs often struggle because PEC meetings become rushed. They feel disorganized or overly data heavy right before the annual program evaluation. But when you create constant workflows throughout the year, everything becomes so much more manageable. So what is the PEC? Let's start there. At its core, the Program Evaluation Committee supports the annual program evaluation process. They're siblings. Your older sibling is your APE, and your PEC is going to help to support and follow the lead of that APE. Operationally, it really functions as an infrastructure and quality improvement committee. The PEC reviews your program performance, evaluates your outcomes, identifies opportunities for improvement, it reviews your curriculum effectiveness, it assesses the learning environment, and monitors ongoing action plans. It's also one of the clearest ways programs can demonstrate continuous longitudinal improvement. And that phrase, continuous improvement, is incredibly important to accreditation conversations. Surveyors want to see that programs are identifying their opportunities, they're creating action plans, they're following up on them, and they're reassessing the outcomes over time. I've said in my last video, and I've said it several times before, perfection is not expected. It's the continuous improvement, the continuous steady upward trajectory of the program. So now let's talk about why PEC meetings sometimes can become and feel pretty frustrating. Some very common issues include meetings becoming overly operational, too much data without prioritization, lack of preparation, no ownership of action items, and discussions that never lead to follow up. I'm pretty sure every single one of those bullet points I personally have experienced in the last few years. I think many coordinators and managers have experienced situations where people arrive unprepared, reports are being opened for the first time during the meeting, the conversation drifts off track, and problems are discussed repeatedly without any resolution. You feel like you're having the same conversation ad nauseum, meeting after meeting after meeting, and there's no updates and you don't go anywhere. Over time, that creates meeting fatigue. People stop viewing the PEC as meaningful and instead they start to see it as an obligation. The purpose of a strong agenda is really to create structure and intentionality. So, an effective PEC agenda should keep the conversation focused, on track, and timely, support the decision making, track improvement initiatives, create accountability, and improve efficiency. The purpose of your agenda is to have documentation and help tell the story on a piece of paper of what happened during the meeting. It's also to support all of these other functions to ensure that the meeting is running smoothly and effectively. The agenda, if you really think about it, is essentially your roadmap for your meeting. Without structure, PEC meetings often become reactive instead of strategic. And one thing that we always encourage programs to think about is what decisions actually need to come out of this meeting. Because reviewing information without creating actionable next steps does not move programs forward. The most effective PEC agendas include several core components. Typically, these include approval of the previous minutes, review of prior action items, resident and fellow feedback, program performance data, quality improvement discussions, accreditation updates, new business, and next steps. Now, every program might structure things slightly differently depending on your specialty, your size, your institutional structure, your program culture, but consistency matters. When committee members know the meeting flow ahead of time, preparation becomes easier and discussions become more productive. Your participants have time to gather their thoughts, to gather their contributions on what they want to bring to the table on these important topics, and you have a more well rounded, fruitful discussion. One of the best ways to improve PEC meetings is to define the purpose of the meeting before building the agenda. Think about it. It just sets the tone as you're building your agenda or even before you're running the meeting when you start the meeting. It just sets the tone. It reminds you why you're here, why you're creating this agenda, what is the purpose. So you want to ask yourself or remind your participants what decisions need to happen today, what issues require discussion, what outcomes do we need from this meeting, and prioritize high impact items first. One major mistake that programs make is trying to solve every operational issue in one PEC meeting. That usually tends to lead to exhaustion and lack of progress. Instead, you want to focus on your strategic topics, prioritize your major trends, and assign follow up tasks when needed. When I think back to some of our PEC meetings, it would be like we have a saying here where I live of packing 10 pounds of crap into a 5-pound bag because you only in a community based program you only have so much time together. And so we would have 2 meetings a year, and it would just be scrambling to get as much information and put as much as you can onto slides because you have all of these high yield things and they are all important. It because we care about all of it and we want to improve and we want to assess all of these things. And all of these things would be slapped in. And then by halfway through the meeting, just everyone is just like, I need to go get a cup of coffee because it's so much information. Templates are one of the easiest ways to reduce operational burden. So, a standardized PEC template improves your consistency and helps people to prepare, as we had spoken to before. It supports your documentation because documentation is also extremely important. It's arguably just as important because that's what's telling your story, right? That is going to tell your story. It also creates predictability. Committee members know what data to expect, what sections will be discussed, what materials that they should be reviewing beforehand so they too can feel prepared. And honestly, templates reduce mental load tremendously for our program coordinators and our program managers. Here's an example of a structured PEC meeting flow. You might want to start with your attendance and your approvals. Review your previous action items, resident and faculty survey trends, curriculum review, rotation concerns, milestones, board pass rates, scholarly activity, then action planning and assignments. Notice that this flow moves logically from review, discussion, decision making to action planning. That sequence helps your meetings to feel organized instead of chaotic and all over the place. Preparation is probably the single biggest factor that determines whether a PEC meeting succeeds. One of the most helpful strategies is distributing materials early. Ideally, agendas, reports, survey summaries, and supporting documents should be shared ahead of time. People process information differently. And this is something that I used to communicate so much in my program. Inevitably, every program evaluation committee, it would be put together through the night before into the morning of. I know for me as the program manager, I would feel so uneasy because I never knew what was coming. I didn't know what system I would have to defend. I wouldn't know what system I would have to explain and break down. I would kind of know the high yield things that we were covering, but I wouldn't know the details, the slides. I am someone that needs to process. If I process in the moment, you're going to see my emotions and my anxiety. I am a high anxiety person, and that will come through. And I would just always be on edge for PEC, even though it's one of the things that I love the most. After the meeting, when it's breaking all the things down, I was good. I was ready to soar. But the meetings itself, the unpredictability of it made the meetings for me very hard to be present. Some of your faculty might feel the same way because different people process information in very different ways. So giving your committee members time to review the data beforehand, it improves the quality of discussion significantly. Some of your faculty members might be able to look at the things that you're discussing and think of some great real world examples and maybe some different perspectives on what led to that situation that you might not have thought of. It also allows the meeting itself to focus on analysis and decisions instead of people silently reading spreadsheets during the meeting because they're just getting the information now and processing it in the moment. So, some commonly prepared documents include previous meeting minutes, action item trackers, faculty evaluations, resident feedback summaries, milestone reports, board performance data, your ads updates, scholarly activity reports, and case logs. One thing that we strongly encourage is creating a centralized PEC repository. Whether that's a shared drive, a cloud system, a PEC binder, although I am not an advocate of binders, I do not approve of binders. I'm a paperless kind of girl, but some programs it does work for them, or institutional dashboards. Organization does matter, and especially during any type of accreditation review. And that's what PEC is. It's an accreditation review. One of the biggest mistakes that programs make is overwhelming PEC meetings with too much raw data. Your data should tell a story. So instead of presenting endless spreadsheets, focus on the trends, the patterns, the areas of concern, your opportunities for improvement. So, for example, instead of reading every survey result individually, summarize what themes are emerging, what trends are improving, what concerns persist. Visual summaries, dashboards, and concise reporting often improve discussion quality dramatically. It helps people to visually see the story that you're trying to say. So as you're telling the story, your visual learners are able to see the story. Efficiency matters because PEC members are balancing many responsibilities. Some strategies that help include time limits for agenda sections. Stick to your time limits. Have a timekeeper. That's something when way back when I worked in family medicine, we would have an assigned person who keeps us on track on the agenda. We would have an assigned person who's our opener, who's our closer, and a timekeeper. And that was really important. And we really did stick to those roles. And it kept us going. And it really was a good thing. One thing that can really derail meetings is your operational rabbit holes. That can get you off track and go way deep into left field fast. And then next thing you know, you've completely lost the purpose of your meeting. Someone can mention one issue, and then suddenly the meeting becomes entirely about scheduling or staffing problems. Having someone that's able to redirect those discussions respectfully is incredibly helpful. We would have a faculty member that would be like, "Okay, guys, like let's get back. Can we please get back on? I have a 5 o'clock appointment for my daughter. Can we please get back to the purpose of what we're supposed to talk about?" Or someone who would get frustrated, and if they were virtual on the meeting, all of a sudden the camera goes off because they've tuned out, right? Where if you have people who have defined roles, you don't have to wait for people to get to that space of anxiety or frustration. If you're going off into left field, they're already consciously aware of it and they're steering you back. And that's their purpose. And that also helps to keep them engaged in the meeting too. So the strongest PEC meetings encourage honest dialogue. That requires psychological safety. People need to feel comfortable discussing concerns, trends, and opportunities without fear of blame. Resident participation is especially important. Surveyors often look carefully at whether residents are meaningfully involved in PEC discussions and improvement planning. And this is something that I learned in the somewhat recent past is PEC and ACGME wants to make sure that resident participation is happening, right? And we all know that, and that is an accreditation requirement. However, something that someone had told me that their site visitor was looking for was documentation in their minutes of what the contribution was that the residents actually provided. Because the part of the story that showed was a lot of things. One, that the resident felt comfortable enough to participate in the meetings and give their feedback and their thoughts and their ideas and their suggestions and experiences. So there was a sense of psychological safety in order to do that. And then two, you were able to take those thoughts and ideas and look into the action items and see if that was taken into consideration when your action items came to fruition. And that is not to imply that site visitors are looking for every time a resident brings an idea or a fellow to the PEC that an action item comes directly from it. But what they do want to see is that there's a well-balanced picture, that you're taking the residents' feedback or your fellows' feedback into the story of what you're trying to address and the data point that you're trying to assess in your program evaluation committee. So remember, again, the goal is improvement, not perfection. Programs grow when feedback is welcomed constructively, especially from the residents, because you have to look at it even in the programs where you have the most flat leadership and your perception might be that you don't have this hierarchical leadership. As someone who was often the only non-MD or DO at the table, including residents and fellows, it's there. Even when it's unspoken, it's there. And it just is. And you can do all of the things to consciously break that down. But to exactly my earlier point with residents, at the end of the day, they're sitting in a room with program leadership. How I say that I feel imposter syndrome as the only non-physician or non-clinician in the room. Sometimes residents and fellows feel that too. They respect their faculty immensely. They respect their program leadership team, including your program manager and your program coordinator, even when you might not feel it. They really do. And sometimes that can be hard to speak up. And it can be especially hard to speak up when the agenda item is a faculty issue and you're asking the residents what their perspective is. So creating that sense of psychological safety and ensuring that feedback is welcome in all of the spaces and just keeping that on the forefront of your mind because that's really when your programs are growing and improving. Tracking action items. This is one of the most important operational pieces. Every discussion should lead to ownership. Without accountability, the same problem gets discussed repeatedly. So, effective action items tracking includes identifying an issue, assigning the owner, a timeline, progress updates, and your final outcome. And then those action items should return to future PEC meetings so that they can be part of the follow up. And then this creates visible, continuous improvement of your program. Building an annual PEC calendar. One of the best infrastructure strategies programs can implement is creating an annual PEC calendar. Instead of scrambling before your annual program evaluation, distribute major reviews throughout the year. So, for example, your survey review cycles, your milestones, your board data, scholarly activity, recruitment outcomes, rotation evaluations. Those things, some of those things happen in the same chunks of time, but some of them happen different times throughout the year because our jobs are so cyclical. So, reviewing them throughout the year and the time when that information is important and that information is happening, you're mapping these across the academic year to create predictable workflows and reducing the administrative burnout. Technology and organization tips. Technology can significantly improve your PEC organization. Helpful systems might include shared drives, cloud based repositories, tracking dashboards. I'm a big dashboard kind of girl. For me, I think they're incredibly helpful, and standardized templates, automated reminders, centralized documentation systems. Even relatively simple organizational systems can dramatically improve consistency and efficiency over time. Infrastructure creates sustainability. Site visitors often focus less on perfection and more on evidence of engagement and continuous improvement. I feel like that's the biggest piece of information that I've been trying to drive home as we've been talking about site visits and PEC and accreditation requirements. They frequently notice things such as your resident involvement, structured follow up, action planning, meeting consistency, how often is it happening, documentation, as well as accountability. Programs don't need to be flawless, but they do need to demonstrate thoughtful evaluation and ongoing improvement efforts. This is a simple example of how programs might organize action item tracking. And the key here is visibility. Programs should be able to quickly identify what issue was identified, who's owning the issue, when the issue is expected or anticipated to be completed, the current status of it, and then the final result. This creates transparency and it helps to prevent important initiatives from getting lost in between the meetings. So, as we wrap up, here's the biggest takeaway from today's discussion. A strong PEC agenda can create structure, improve your efficiency, support meaningful discussion, enhance accreditation readiness, and drive continuous improvement. Preparation matters, consistency matters, documentation matters. Most importantly, PEC meetings should help programs to improve, not simply survive the accreditation requirements. So, thank you so much for joining us in today's discussion. We hope that this conversation gave you practical ideas and strategies that you can bring back to your own programs and your PEC processes. If this video resonated with you, let us know in the comments. What is the biggest PEC or infrastructure challenge that your program faces? And if you found any value in this discussion, please like this video. Please subscribe to our channel. Follow us on Instagram as well as LinkedIn, and check out our downloadable templates, toolkits, and resources designed specifically for GME professionals. You can also connect with us at gmeleadershipcompass@gmail.com. Thank you again for being here. We'll see you in the next video.